Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Williams, and I'm going to go ahead and take us through some of the pros and cons of charter schools and cyber schooling. We'll talk about it a little bit as well. Anyways, the first thing I want to talk about is some of the segregation that seems to be happening because of the implementation of charter schools. Pennsylvania has had a number of charter schools surface, and this has been really statewide. Anyways, one thing that's been found is that both African American and Latino students who leave their traditional public schools, the schools that were originally assigned to them, when they do go to charter schools, they're typically going to ones that are more racially segregated. And the reason this is so important is there's been a lot of studies really since the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case where they talk about the importance of having segregated classrooms just because it fosters a more, number one, democratic education, but we have the chance to learn from different groups. And one thing that's worth noting too, that white students as well, depending on really what region of Pennsylvania they're in, were more likely to be in more segregated charter schools. But these charter schools have a much higher concentrated poverty rate than other schools in the area. And yet again, it's important to have diversity in the classroom. That having students from higher socioeconomic status, that they're more likely to have a better education and to just contribute and to enhance the educational environment that's taking place. And this segregation is by no means specific to Pennsylvania. I've got a list of other areas here, and specifically Philadelphia within Pennsylvania. One thing that the authors of this study did note is that how important a diversity plan could be. If charter schools needed to have a diversity plan in place before their charter was given, and then before the charter was reauthorized years down the road, that they need to be accountable for this to make sure that there is diversity within these schools. Anyways, and this is not specific to the United States either. Sweden, which is a relatively uniform country, they've seen some segregation occur in their charter schools, essentially where the segregation was based on whether or not these are children of immigrants or whether or not the families or students have been in the country for generations, and what level of education their parents have received, whether it be a college degree, high school degree. But those are really the main ways we've seen segregation manifest itself in charter schools throughout Sweden. One thing worth noting that the study concluded with is the fact that in order to curb the segregation, because charter schools are not inherently bad, is the fact that we need to go ahead and institute a lottery method. So students are admitted randomly instead of basically being selected based by certain criteria. And this is within place in the U.S. as well. The problem is that charter schools are so differently implemented throughout the United States is the fact that there is no uniform way we do this. There are a lot of studies that talk about the pros of charter schools, but there's a lot of studies that have as many things to say that are bad. And the reason this is so important right now is with Betsy DeVos, our Secretary of Education, seems to be pushing this route. We need to make sure we're going in the right direction. The charter schools are, as I said a minute ago, they're not necessarily bad, but we need to make sure they're being implemented correctly if that is the direction the federal government does decide to go into. Anyways, one thing that's worth noting is that a lot of school systems like Chicago public schools, they have open enrollment where there's this vast number of charter schools that can't be selected from. But the issue is that families, they might have English, maybe English isn't their primary language at home, or they're from lower socioeconomic statuses, they're less likely to have the resources to pick the best fit for their students. So therefore, the argument can be made is that open enrollment in charter schools is are less likely to be used properly by families that aren't as likely to navigate the system properly and to pick the best school for them. And this is kind of going to that point as well. One major criticism of charter schools has been that their primary goal is maximizing efficiency when providing an education. Public schools kind of see education as first and efficiency as second. And the reason this is important now is the fact that if you have ESL students or disabled students, they require more resources to have a fair and equal access to education. And charter schools have come under scrutiny because they might be trying to cut corners in order to save money. And as a result, they may not be willing to take as many ESL students or disabled students, students with special needs. So that's just definitely a point of contention, something that needs to be looked at, as the federal government does seem to be going in the direction of more charter schools. Anyways, I've got two studies that I'm referencing here. There's one that was conducted in Denver. There's another that was conducted around the New Orleans public school system as more charter schools become popular. But in Denver, they found that a lot of students with specific learning disabilities were less likely to be identified. And some concern is being raised on whether or not that's just because the district is trying to cut corners. And with New Orleans, what the issue was there is the fact that they were less likely, these schools were less likely to go ahead and allocate the proper funds for the proper training, the proper tools, or hiring the proper personnel to adequately provide an equal education to these students. Another city that I thought was interesting perspective right here, Vancouver, very much like Chicago, they have open enrollment, different charter schools that people could take advantage of. However, Vancouver does not provide free transportation for their students. So therefore, students of low socioeconomic backgrounds were less likely to take advantage of school choice. Not to mention that certain families prefer to kind of stay in their neighborhood schools if transportation isn't provided, because their students are safe and they feel they don't want to send them away. Seoul, South Korea had a kind of an interesting case that their high school system originally had random assignment, basically like a lottery system, where they went ahead and put students in a school depending on just the lottery. Anyways, they've recently switched where they went ahead and it's open enrollment. You apply, you get in, or you don't. But what's happened since that's been in place is that the disadvantaged students, ones that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, their standardized test scores dropped pretty significantly since it's been in place, just kind of showing some of the pitfalls that charter schools can have. Michigan has actually been under a lot of scrutiny as of late, just because they've had a lot of issues that they've really pushed this free market educational charter school system, and they've had a ton of issues that they are ranked as one of the lowest states in the union in terms of standardized test scores, and progressively trying to they're not allocating as many proper resources as other states. Let's talk about cyber schools, as we're getting close to that 10-minute mark. But cyber schools have become pretty commonplace, and this makes sense just because that local neighborhood schools may not have as many offerings as cyber schools might have, or just because it's a good alternative. But Georgia specifically has had a lot of issues with their cyber schools. And that is just because they've been ranked, and that they've just going to be found to be lower ranking compared to the local neighborhood schools. And this could partly be because a lot of low-income students are more likely to go ahead and enroll, and it's less likely to go ahead and have high-quality teachers. And part of the reason for that is that teachers are paid less to do this here. Anyways, I found a website or a source that had these quick major cons of why cyber schools may not be as good as the traditional public schools. I'm going to keep moving here. Oh, and this is my last slide, so I can go through them. Anyways, issue number one, the lack of social interaction that just is crucial to help education. Learning from your peers, that's less likely to take place in a cyber school. Not being able to talk to your instructor immediately, might lead to frustration, may make students less likely to engage in questions. Assessments, they're all online. There's not any group discussion that's right away. Teachers don't have the ability to go ahead and create, the classrooms that we see. And not to mention, if you're at home, you just are way more likely to be distracted by just all the various things that are here to keep you distracted.